Do you ever just expect something in the game's soundtrack just to wonder, why did it go like that? Maybe you thought something else would be more appropriate? Well, today we're going to be exploring exactly that. Sometimes things are just weird and deserve some cleaning up. Let's get out our broomsticks and clean up some soundscapes. Welcome to Music Arcade. Hello everyone, I'm Galen the Sound Guy Firestone.
And I'm Ranakel.
Once again, Eddie is not with us. Unfortunately, he is down with the flu yet again. He has been going through it lately. Let's send some love his way.
Much love, Eddie. Get better. Although he did mention that he was on his way up and should be there with us for the next episode.
Yes, he is on the mend this time around, which is great.
Eddie fans rejoice.
For reals. Anyways, so, the concept for this episode came basically as I was playing the thing we're going to be talking about today, because this has been just in my head bouncing around for literally a few months now since this thing's release.
Yeah, for all the good you listeners get from Music Arcade, and I hope you do get something from it, it also is, let's not hide it, a tool for us to get some things out of our heads.
Yeah.
And this has that energy to a T.
And just because it's bouncing in our head does not mean it's invalid. Criticism is important, so long as it's criticism that comes from actually paying attention and actually, like, studying and actually, like, having some kind of reasoning for it.
Yeah, that's a thing that got into my head several times during the research process. And that was that the plan was not to just bash bad soundtracks.
No.
And even less to say, I'm better than that composer because I saw that with hindsight.
Yeah, no, we're not trying to do that. Suffice it to say, out of the three of us, I'm probably the most musical, and I couldn't compose my way out of a paper bag, so it's not as though I'm trying to assert some kind of moral or technical authority over these composers, or in my case, a sound supervisor, since the composer is kind of great. But this is a case where I think things should have been done differently. And that's what I want to discuss. This is just strictly our opinions. This is not to be taken as gospel by anybody. Please don't hate us.
But our hope is that even if you disagree with all points, it can lead to some thinking avenues.
Yes.
And help you form your own opinions on these soundtracks or others. But before we do, I believe there is something that should be corrected.
Yeah. Okay, so, back in the previous episode, I was going through it. My life had taken a pretty severe downturn, and I was kind of brute forcing the episode out. And I mentioned that in the intro, and unfortunately during this, I actually missed a very important, thing that was stated. I heard it during editing, and I'm like, wait, we talked about this? How did that happen? And that is that the Risk of Rain composer actually released the, what did you call it?
The engineering edition.
The engineering edition, which is giving us the individual stems, like the bass stem, the guitar stem. I'm using this, as a, example. I don't really know what goes in there. But basically the various instrument groups released separately to allow engineers to practice mixing on. This is such a cool thing, and I hate that I missed it, and I hate that I didn't react to it. Like,
yeah, I was surprised by the little reaction that got from you.
Yeah. And again, the reason for it is I was just distracted with my own mayhem. There was just so much going on in my life that I was ready to scream, and I must have just blanked on it.
It was pretty late in the episode too, and we were all super tired.
Yeah, that one was dragging on for a while as well. That was a very long recording session. I feel like I edited it down to something reasonable, but...
You hero, you.
Thank you. So I want to apologize for missing that, and I would like to say once again how cool, how rare that is. If you are interested in mixing, and if you are interested in learning how to do this, there is nothing stopping you from going on a Bandcamp, downloading these things, and plugging them into any digital audio workstation, free ones like Reaper or Audacity, and just playing around with it.
Even if you don't plan to compose outright, it's some treasure of a resource to see how the source is made.
Absolutely.
It's almost like seeing the source code of the song. Shoutouts to Twitch.
Ha. All right. That I'm not going to talk about. That
has nothing to do with the episode.
Yeah, that's not particularly relevant and is in fact kind of scary, but that's yes. You know.
And if you haven't heard, just stay safe and take some measures regarding password securities. Yeah. Stream keys were rerolled for everybody.
Mine got rerolled twice. I rerolled it myself, and then they rerolled it again a few hours later.
Same for me.
Yeah.
I just was cautious before they were.
Yeah, same.
So I'm like a hipster of Twitch security.
Same. I take my online security very seriously. So, yeah, now that we have that out of the way, let's actually talk about our topic. Which is what we do differently. What I do differently is I would have talked about the frickin' stems, and I may actually take a crack at mixing those, to be perfectly honest. I might actually, stretch my music muscles a little bit and see about playing around on the mix.
Well, if you have things that are worth giving it a little listen, I would be curious.
Let's see what happens. All right. So now, let's talk about what we do differently. Rana, start us off.
Alright, so I'm going to start off with a couple of tracks that are related and that are from Genshin Impact. So what's happening there is that essentially they had a part of the main story where you're fighting the ruler of one of the lands that you explore through the game. And the first time you meet her, this way, it's just an automatic loss. At some points, you can't use any of your powers anymore, with very few exceptions, and then she instantly wipes your party.
Fun. Okay, that's pretty much something you don't really see in a gacha game too often.
Yeah, it's more of a plot point that really say, I'm an RPG too. And throughout that part of the fight, you get the first phase, because it felt like a first phase music. And it was very good at that, I thought. It has this tension all throughout. It has an elevated pace that doesn't really get into something either messy or that goes too fierce on some point or another. It's some sort of composed dismantling that works very well with what's happening. And the thing is that you don't get the second part of this fight if you were playing there at release like I did, until a month and a half after. Or 3 months after. No, a month and a half. Because that's the patch cycle. It updates every month and a half, and the second part of the fight, with a rematch of the first part, only came at that point.
Okay.
Which means that for that month and a half, I could get used to that first phase of the fight, and started imagining what the second phase could sound like. And of course, eventually we get to the obvious rematch.
Right.
And the plot point where we manage to break through the ability to block the powers and everything. using the power of friendship, and we have a second phase of the fight where we are in a superpowered state, and it's all cool and all. And we have the music that changes according to that second phase, of course. Now, the problem is not quite that it wasn't what I imagined. I didn't have any precise idea of what that second phase music could be. But what I assumed, if only according to previous work of Yu Pen Chen, the composer, was that it would have anything to do with the first phase music. And save for 5 seconds at the beginning where there is the theme that is echoed a little, the rest of the track has nothing to do with it at all. It's just an upbeat version of the main character theme of your opponent, which wasn't present in the first phase of the fight. And that just makes you feel like you've missed a step somewhere.
Yeah, that seemed... okay.
And the fact that it came a month and a half later is an aggravating factor in this situation because of the anticipation and the fact that I really liked and still like the first phase theme.
Yeah.
And what also doesn't help is the fact that that character's theme is just about some of the most basic Japanese music you could, a traditional Japanese music theme you could go for. It's
Wait.
Yeah, it's just something that's Japanese music.mp3, you probably have something like that. And that's that character's theme. Now, I get that she's the ruler or something, but that's still very much something that's disappointing with that anticipation at the very least. And to clarify something on that point specifically, there's no problem with using classic phrases of music of this or that place in the world. But that must be done with some sort of intent behind it. If not, it just feels lazy.
Yeah.
A counterpoint to that is music in Yakuza Like a Dragon, in which you have essentially a dungeon that's happening as you pretty much invade a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown.
Nice.
And so the music has immediately this 70s or 80s Hong Kong action movie feel going, and as such it invokes the tropes of that kind of movies. And so when the music at some point, and only at the end once, goes
Really?
Yes, it does. And it's clearly to, again, play on those tropes instead of just using that and that's it.
Yeah, Yeah, all right. I wish I knew where that specific phrase came from, because one, that specific phrase was made up by white people, and two, like, yeah, it's, man, that was everywhere in the 80s, and it just never, like, it just sounds like, you know what, I'm gonna shut up about this now.
More research required.
Yeah.
Maybe. But yeah, the point is still that if you invoke something specific, and especially in that case where it has this kind of cheesy air to it, it's it can work. Here, it doesn't. It just uses without much thought something that's already there.
That's a bit of a shame, especially considering how long it took for the second half of that fight to come up. Yeah.
I imagine the problem is a bit lessened for people that come later on and only have to wait like 2 or 3 hours to get back there. But even then, it just... I don't know, I think in some ways that first phase theme deserved better, even though it's the same composer, so... Yeah.
Weird. Yeah, I don't... That's a very strange decision. I wonder if there was like a rush going on or a plan change, or maybe an initial song was rejected or something and they had to come up with something on the fly.
Yeah, composing in big studios can have a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of love for... I don't want to say laziness, but shortcuts.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot of love for shortcuts in game music. I feel like the art form, the genre, the platform has enough trouble staying, like, being respected by mainstream media as it is.
Yeah.
And, like, there's shorthand crap in every genre. It's just everywhere. And hearing a case like this, where this big important theme seems to have been largely underprepared, just feels like it's inviting the wrong kind of criticism.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of make it feel like the composer was a bit out of his depth in comparison, but that's because the previous act was in a Chinese-inspired landmass. So the composer, being Chinese, had tons of things to draw from and gave us some wonderful pieces that we, as Westerners, wouldn't have gotten to hear normally. Things like Zhongli's theme, or, of course, the fight against Ashtaha, which has a mix of influences and goes really strong. So that could be that he just wasn't really familiar with the subject matter in this way, but even then, there's another boss fight that you have in the same patch that has you fight against one of those villains that are themed after some characters from the Commedia dell'arte, and so have some classic or Renaissance Italian inspiration to those themes. And for this one, which is also a boss theme with a first phase, a second phase, and a character theme we heard a long time ago, even longer than that, it worked great.
Yeah, the more I hear about this, the more I like, without having heard the song, the more I feel like this might have been a rush job.
Yeah.
This just the way you're describing it just smacks of Deadline to me.
Yeah, there's something about the inconsistency of it that just can't sit right.
Yeah, and to be clear, this happens. I have turned in absolute just... We have 3 days to get done a whole episode of TV, do what you can. I've turned in soundscapes like that before.
No, I'm sure.
So, it does happen. It does happen. It's a shame, but I guess that's the whole point. Like, developers,
no, it's there.
Stop with this crunch nonsense.
Very much so. No, something that shouldn't be related to that. How about we get to your part?
Oh boy. All right. So we talk a lot on this show about two of my favorite soundtracks these days, Final Fantasy XIV and of course, the combined works of NieR and Drakengard from Keiichi Okabe. These intersected in the game in a crossover raid of NieR in Final Fantasy XIV.
A match made in heaven.
It really is. It's a lot smoother than I thought it would be, to be perfectly honest with you. You'd think a story about an alien robot invasion would be a lot weirder in a fantasy game than it turned out to be, but it actually, fit really well.
I still felt a bit more detached than the other raids, but that's a conversation for another.
Yeah, there's a few things in the raid itself I would have done differently. But I would call the second part, the Puppet's Bunker, to be an absolute standout. It gets just everything right. It's fun, it's unique, it's engaging. The music choices are immaculate. This just sets such a high example. The first part, the copied factory, was pretty darn great in and of itself. The second part just ramped it up.
Gave us the line, oh yeah, the corpse room, that's a thing.
Mm-hmm. We're not going to describe the corpse room because it's gigantic spoilers for 3 different games, so... But there is a corpse room, and it is, in fact, a thing.
As mentioned by our character.
Correct.
Unless you're a Boeing person and want to pick the other line.
Yeah. And then the third part happened. The Tower at Paradigm's Breach. Oh, man. I will admit, I was disappointed by this one. And I was really disappointed by the soundtrack. So far, the music supervision has been on point. But this time, the song selections from NieR Automata, just made no sense. They were weird.
It's mostly the pattern for the way that they've established is that they use pretty much whole cloth NieR Automata songs for the first 3 bosses and the parts in between, and then for the final boss, they have a crossover song with elements of a Final Fantasy song and a NieR song, or a Drakengard song crossover.
Right. In the first one, it was a combination of Weight of the World, which is NieR Automata's main theme, and the Final Fantasy Prelude. This works better than you think it does. The second one is the 2 big boss themes of the game. You have Torn from the Heavens from Final Fantasy XIV, which is this big rip-roaring boss theme, and then you have its crossed over with the Dark Colossus Destroys All, one of my favorite boss themes of all time, and it just blends together so perfectly. I don't even know where to begin. It's so good.
Yeah, these crossover songs are amazing.
Yeah, and they're just excellent. And even then, just in the Puppet's Bunker, you have the supervision of everything makes sense. The bunker music plays in the bunker. Okay, cool. You have Bipolar Nightmare, another of my all-time favorite boss themes, playing during a fight that makes sense. It just all works together. You even have a very cool version of End of the Unknown version. You have a very cool usage of End of the Unknown, which is a boss fight in NieR Automata that I don't want to spoil, but it works in that same kind of uniqueness vibe. And while that may be my least favorite fight in the Puppet's Bunker, I have to respect the music choice. It just clicks. It just works. Meanwhile, the Tower does not play the Tower. It plays Mourning.
Yeah.
So you're listening to this dark, depressing cutscene music in the Tower when there is a perfectly good song called The Tower to play during the Tower.
And if you really didn't want the Tower, there could have been the theme from Copied City.
I was thinking, I was actually going to say exactly that. We are 100% on the same page there. I was actually yes, the Tower is the final dungeon music. Yeah,
it's a great thing that's both down-tempo and works amazingly as a build-up to something explosive.
Yeah. And the Tower Paradigm's Breach doesn't do that. The dungeon music is Mourning, which is cutscene music. Just sad cutscene music. There's no tension. There's no energy. It just feels like it sounds like a dirge. And for those cutscenes, it's great. It's a great piece of music.
Of course.
For what it's good for. This isn't what it's good for. So right out of the gate, we have a problem. Then we get to the first boss, the Jack of Blades.
Oh, and to clarify something, it's not even a situation where there's a morning music because what you're doing as a group of 24 murder hobos is questionable.
No, you're off to save the world, essentially.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the song makes no sense. There were so many different things you could have done with it. Well, anyway, okay, so we get to the first boss. The Jack of Blades. And for some inexplicable reason, it plays Email Despair. Okay, first, this is not Email. We're not fighting Email. I don't know why Email's music is here. This makes no sense. It makes a little tiny bit of sense if you squint at it because of what happens in NieR Gestalt. I don't really want to spoil it, but Emil's involved in that. But even then, Emil was fighting this thing. He wasn't this thing. The Jack of Blades is this big, just shadow thing from NieR Gestalt Replicant. This big, you could almost call it a Colossus. You could almost call it a Dark Colossus. Yes. You could almost call
Maybe a Dark Colossus that destroys all.
Yeah, you could almost call it the Dark Colossus. Oh, wait, that's exactly what it did. So, fun fact about the Dark Colossus Destroys All, which I just mentioned is, like, this incredible boss theme that you played at the end of, Puppet's Bunker. This is it. This is the Dark Colossus from NieR Gestalt Replicant. This is where this song debuted. What the heck?
Yeah, it felt like they did a song substitution less because it would fit this fight and more to justify giving you an orchestral role, so a way to listen to the soundtrack again in your home of that song specifically.
Okay, yes, but there's also the fact that they actually gave us just random orchestrion rolls later.
Exactly!
They could have just done that. Or they could have had Email show up and justify it some way. Or they could have used any other music on the planet. This probably should have been the Dark Colossus Destroys All, but failing that, just use one of the prior boss themes again. It's not like the next boss doesn't do exactly that. But
then again, the next boss feels like a trash.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about that in a moment. But this first boss is like, you're fighting the Dark Colossus and it's playing Email's theme. This feels wrong. This doesn't work. I'm annoyed by this. This is one of the most annoying things of this entire raid, is this boss fight. Because you're not fighting Email. You're not doing anything involving Email. It's playing Email's music. It's the Dark Colossus. The Dark Colossus. You're not even playing Dark Colossus Kaiju from Automata. That would have worked. A different mix than the Puppet's Bunker one. Sure, go for it.
Yeah,
why not?
Absolutely.
You're fighting the Dark Colossus and it's not playing the Dark Colossus music. It really bothers me. That one just, that hits me the wrong way.
Moving on.
Hey, remember that song remember that boss fight we said should have been a trash bowl? Probably should have been a trash bowl.
Very much so.
But it isn't a trash bowl. It's boss music. It's boss music. I believe it plays Song of the Ancient Automata again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This one kind of works. You know, Song of the Ancients is about a pair of twins. Hansel and Gretel are twin bosses. It kind of works. The thing is, in NieR Gestalt and Replicant, this played a very different music called Bluebird, which was this, like, vocal-driven, tribal drums, just angry-sounding song. It's not actually a song I like from NieR Gestalt and Replicant all that much, but it's their music. Probably should have played that. But it's from Gestalt Replicant. They weren't really going for that. This is supposed to be a NieR Automata crossover, despite the, like, two bosses here.
Yep.
So, okay, fine. How about Birth of a Wish? That's a very similar vibe to Bluebird. That would have worked pretty good here, right?
And would have set up another encounter a boss and a half down the line.
Oh, yeah. This one's okay. This one's kind of forgivable, but...
You have like 50 versions you can use. Use any of them.
Yeah.
Use the one where the CEOs of Platinum Games and Square Enix do vocals if you want.
Oh, I forgot about that one. That one's great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, this is just one of these things where it's like, why are you... I mean, I get why Song of the Ancient Automata, but I just don't like it. I kind of wish maybe you were fighting Popola and Devila instead, because that would have at least made sense for the song. But that song was also used in prior levels. I don't know why this happened this way. Okay, moving on. Trash pull. which just plays Morning again. Man, if it was bad for dungeon exploration, it's really bad for trash fights. Morning is not a good song for trash fights.
No, it isn't. Although, it's probably the best trash fights they could have used the song for because of what trash is thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even then, it loses any impact it could have if that was deliberate because of the fact that it's used before and after as well.
Yeah. It's just again, it sounds like a dirge. It doesn't pump you up. It's just there.
Exactly.
Okay, and then we have one I'm going to give perfect marks to is the Red Girls.
Oh yeah. That encounter is the best of that raid wing on more than just one occasion.
It plays Sound of the End. Good. This was their boss music. So, well, this was essentially their boss music, so this makes sense. And then you get into the hacking minigame. I'm so glad that's part of this. And you get an 8-bit version of it. I'm so glad that exists. And I have no complaints here. That is perfect. Done. Okay, next you have the elevator. And the elevator, you fight something that probably should have been the real third boss, because the second boss should have been trash.
Yep.
And this probably should have played Bipolar Nightmare, because this boss in NieR Automata played Bipolar Nightmare, and I don't see a single reason not to play Bipolar Nightmare here. Alright, and then we get on to the final boss. The first half of the final boss is Possessed by Disease. This song is cool, this song works for the first half, I like it. They don't even make you fight for this one, they just give you this orchestrion roll. You just get it for free. Thank you.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah, I like it. And then the second half happens.
No, I meant for fighting on the elevator specifically.
Oh, yeah, no, the elevator should have been Bipolar Nightmare, because that's the song that played during that fight in NieR Automata. Like,
yeah, but I thought that, I was thinking also about Possessed by Disease, because that's when you first fight the enemy, you refight in the elevator.
I guess, yeah. That would also work.
And I just really like it.
It's a great song. I mean, it works. I mean, I was just about to talk about it. It works perfectly in the next segment, which is the first half of the, actual final boss. And
is that what happened on that fight? I thought it.
Not in Automata. In Automata, it stays with...
No, I mean in FF14.
Yeah, Possessed by Disease is the false idol.
Oh. Completely forgot about that somehow.
I don't know how. They just give you that orchestrion roll for free.
Oh yeah, that's possible. I just haven't fought them in a while now, and I guess that completely slipped my mind.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm really crossing the wires there.
It happens. Okay. And then the final boss happens, and this is a case where the song itself is absolutely gorgeous, and in context, it doesn't work at all. To be clear, it uses a version of Kaine's theme. It was, once again, written by Keiichi Okabe. This one doesn't have much Soken influence, and they actually brought Emmy Evans back to redo the vocals yet again, because this is her signature song at this point.
Yeah.
Great.
And any occasion to have more Emmy Evans, I'm here for it.
I would more or less agree. I just wish it wasn't the song, because, oh man. Yes. Oh, why?
Oh, more accurately, that this song wasn't used in this situation.
Yes. If this song existed in a completely different one, I'd be great with it. But for this boss fight... Okay, so, much like the email fight before, what the hell does this fight have to do with Kaine? Kaine's not even part of this. She's not anywhere. She's not... Why? Kaine is a major character from NieR Gestalt Replicant. She is voiced to perfection by Laura Bailey, and was one of the first times I actually paid attention to her as an actor and went like, oh, Laura Bailey's really awesome.
Yes, she is.
I was actually surprised that they brought her back for the recent remake of NieR Gestalt Replicant on account of, NieR Replicant specifically, not NieR Gestalt. I wish it was Gestalt.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but because, honestly, she's become, in the 10 years since, this absolute giant in voiceover to the point where Gears of War 5 outright advertised her as their lead as a selling point. Which says an awful lot if Microsoft is doing that.
Yep.
Which, like... So, Kaine is a very specific character that this boss has nothing to do with. At all.
This boss does reference some characters. Kaine is not one of them.
Kaine is not one of them. The only reference it gets is the flower, in particular, and that's shared between her and 2B.
And Zero.
And, well, that specific flower, not Zero, but yes, that flower is a general Zero, absolutely.
Yes.
So right out of the gate. Additionally, you're essentially fighting a Grotesquerie Queen from the Drakengard series.
Yes.
You're finally doing so in a way that only involves a minimal rhythm game instead of, you know, what we talked about last time. Grotesquerie Queen came up.
I'm pretty sure Yoko Taro wanted something much more merciless.
I'm sure.
And was quickly denied.
I'm sure. But even then, elements of the rhythm game do appear in the battle in ways that actually made me very happy.
Oh yeah. Like, that's the kind of mechanic that you immediately identify if you've played the game of reference.
Which I did. And I'm like, oh, I see what's going on here. I know what this mechanic is. I'm not going to get hit. And I didn't. And it was great. So, you're fighting a Grotesquerie Queen. I guess the point is my first choice would probably not even be from NieR. It would be just a remix of Final Song, and you could get Emmy Evans back.
Exactly.
But if you really, really
Which is also part of why I brought Zero up.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You're fighting a Grotesquerie Queen. You could absolutely make that work. Now, admittedly, that's not something that's been referenced at all outside of, like, story/poking at it references that you got in over the story. Like, you're fighting a robotic Grotesquerie Queen. This is the culmination of everything that's happened in NieR and Drakengard, happening in FF14 for some inexplicable reason,
exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, it comes out of nowhere anyway, so might as well roll with it.
Yeah. But here's another alternate thought. If you really, really wanted a great boss theme at the end that involved... Why not just use a beautiful song?
Yes.
Like,
because the boss in question for which a beautiful song was for wasn't in this raid, which was my single biggest disappointment.
Yeah.
Because that boss is structured exactly like an MMORPG fight in the original game.
It really kind of is. And then I almost think, like, that's the reason they didn't use Simone, is because, like, what more could you do at this point? It'd be the exact same fight.
Yeah, and I like it.
I mean, that's fair. That is very fair.
There's also another reason to search for another theme for that last boss, last fight, which is the energy of the song they picked.
It's a very, very pretty character theme, which once again just feels just quiet and languid and not really... You're fighting the final boss of a raid.
It's throwing the Square Enix building at you. Literally.
You could get hit by a train. Multiple trains. You fight a rhythm game section where the rhythm doesn't line up to the beats of the song at all. Something... I don't know. I love this song in a vacuum. Individually, it's great. It does not work for this boss. Even like outside of the context of NieR Gestalt and Replicant, it doesn't work. Between that and the dungeon theme, it's just too languid. It's too...
And I like the process of every now and then doing for an emotional fight a song that has no fighting energy in it.
Yeah.
To drive home that this is an emotional or tragic moment. This isn't the case. You're just 24 dudes that got isekai temporarily.
Yeah. You're fighting this grave threat to mankind in a situation that isn't even all that sad. And you have this, like, really tearful, soulful music. God, I wish this was used in some other context, because this song is wonderful. I will defend the song itself for forever, but like the composition is great, but it's just not there with the actual it's just not there with the boss theme. It isn't. I just it bugs me.
It doesn't even work as a way to be on a purely meta level and say, we put this to say goodbye to the raid because that's the last time we have a piece of writing to throw in there. Because then they have weeks and weeks of weekly, daily quests to do to truly finish the content.
Yeah. And left so many things wide open, it wouldn't be surprising to me at all if there was a sequel someday. Now, Geister in the chat brings up an interesting point. She says, to me, the atmosphere it creates is one of all your struggles are futile. Why don't you just give up? It's not even necessary for me to pump you up with music. You have no chance. Just lie down. That would make sense if, one, that was even stated, and two, Song of the End didn't play on the Red Girls, who are the real bad guys, because they're the ones causing all this. Because Song of the End is a legitimately, like, high-intensity, perfect track.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite work. And then, additionally, right before that, like, I know, Rana, you forgot, but right before that fight, it's Possessed by Disease, which is also, like, this really kind of energetic, like, tense track. Even then, it feels like you have this build-up and then just a sharp drop-off, like, not even a letdown. I don't know. I don't know. This one this entire process and every one of these picks has been bouncing around my head for, like, ever. And it's just, I don't know. This raid, the music choices disappointed me more than they didn't. There were a couple of great ones, but I'm just like, I'm not sure why the sound supervisor did it this way. And while I love the fact that Kaine version exists, I'm really baffled as to why it was selected for that boss theme, given the context of this scenario and given the context of the theme itself.
That's another situation where, I mean, in a way, it's going to be most of what we're talking about. It's even more than the success is the kind of situation where I'd love to be a fly on the wall and see what went into getting things the way they ended up being.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, in my head, like that's what I would have done differently there. It just those song choices never hit me as correct, with the exception of the Red Girls and Possessed by Disease. And that's like it. And it just seemed like there were some obvious choices they left on the table, and maybe that's the reason they didn't. They wanted to be a little less obvious, but I felt like it didn't match the emotional torque of the raid at that point.
There's something I learned while watching analysis for strategy games, StarCraft 2 namely,
okay,
which was that a surprise attack doesn't matter more than an attack that's expected if the expected thing is better than what you were going for sneakily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes things are expected because they're what would make you smile.
Yeah.
And you don't need to ponder to that every single time. That's not how wrestling works, to give an example.
Right.
But sometimes, I mean, the raid is mostly fanservice pondering. Might as well do it all the way.
Yeah, especially after the bunker did exactly that, and it was kind of perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tower at Paradigm's Breach, a sadly underwhelming end both musically and mechanically to an otherwise incredible raid sequence. And I hope if/when we do get a sequel raid series or whatever to this, that they bring some more interesting stuff, because I'd like to see some of these. I don't know. They'll never patch this, that's for sure, but I'd love to see.
No, absolutely not.
I really do, like, I may do, like, a version of it where I kind of DJ it and see if it plays.
Yeah, that would be an interesting experiment.
I'll set it up. I'll set up a playlist between what I think are going to be the best ones,
Speaking about substituting different tracks to somebody's gameplay.
Okay.
That's my transition, and I'm glad that I came up.
There you go.
I realized while searching for this episode, basically I was looking for things to talk about. Because that's not easy to see a track and to say, I wouldn't really have done things this way. And then I looked not at the tracks that I have saved on playlists and the like, but at the playlists themselves, and in particular, one that I have titled Sounds of Industry, which I basically made entirely for Satisfactory.
Okay.
And that means that there's something that doesn't really tick with me with the Satisfactory soundtrack. And that's interesting enough to talk about, I believe. Because and I think I've identified why, thanks to the difference between the soundtrack in question and the playlist that I have. And that's because of what I get from this game. So, Satisfactory is a game where you set up heavily automated bases on this alien planet to extract its resources, and then you set up production lines and have projects that balloon in size and complexity, and it's great at that. And though it is on an alien planet, future technology,
right,
there is a very industrial look to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the name, Satisfactory.
Exactly. But as far as the music goes, the tracks are very electronic in a way that suggests something that's clean futuristic as opposed to dirty coal emissions futuristic.
Right.
Which is what you have there. You have a lot of electronic sounds and synths and very muted percussions, if any. And that just doesn't really gels with the immense conveyor lines in a system that becomes too big for your own understanding, even though you built it this way.
Yeah, and I gotta be honest, in my head, like, the description of what I've, well, not the description, but like what I've seen of Satisfactory leads me to think like Devil's Lab from FF6.
Exactly.
Like big kind of clanging and
well, that is one of the tracks in that playlist I mentioned.
Oh, well, there you go. Perfect.
And so I was puzzled a bit and realized something when I asked for opinions regarding another game. Because right now, Des is playing Factorio, which has a very similar energy.
Yeah. It's 2D instead of 3D, and it's a lot more convoluted, I think.
Yes. It's also out of early access, so that probably helps.
Oh, nice.
But it has also these kind of aesthetics applied on a different kind of plane, but that wasn't really what mattered. I asked him, without context, his thought about the soundtrack, and he said, and I quote, "It's pretty cool, it's pretty good, very chill for the most part." And that's when I realized that these soundtracks and that tone doesn't accompany the aesthetics of the game, but the pace of the gameplay. Because for all the industrialist look that the game has, what you're doing in it is very... it's mostly planning. There's no real time constraint. The resource nodes are unlimited, so you are not under a hurry to do anything. You're just enjoying the game at your pace, whatever it is, in which situation the soundtrack does make sense. But only in that context completely occluding the rest of the game. So something like Devil's Lab specifically would probably be a bit too pressing.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that this is the only possible alternative. And two things that came to my mind as points of comparison are first the theme from Alva Kabanik from Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
Okay.
So that's an industrialized city in this game. Basically, they've established themselves on the back of that titanic landmass. That's where all of the world is. And as the Titan was dying, it started getting hotter, and they were like, "Hey, free steam energy!" Which owed to which they owed their industrialization. And so you have this theme that is very heavy the moment you enter, with a bit of an air of there's something grandiose about it while keeping the industrial theme.
You know, while you're talking about that, I'm thinking of the song Field of the Machina from the first Xenoblade. And that kind of feels like that'd be in the same zone there.
I'll admit I don't remember that song, but I imagine that it can work very well. Because of the where it's located and the fact that it's the same composer.
Yeah, it's Ace Plus, yeah.
But this one in particular had me thinking of this one because it's easy to say your goal is to turn these lush alien environments into an optimized chain of production that's spouting enough coal to black out the air, and to think this has to be something depressing. This doesn't have to be something depressive. This can absolutely have an impressive and encouraging air to it.
Right.
Because the game doesn't really question this action, and I think that's part of the deliberate game's tone, that it has this corporate front that's kind of handling the PR for you. But if you wanted to have something that's a bit more heavy, with a bit more pressure, you could go with something more similar to a track from Anno 2070, which is called Industrial Landscapes.
That's a fitting title.
Game, very much so. And in that game, where you also manage chains of production, but at a different level entirely, and you populate your island with 3 types of faction, essentially, each with their own productions and challenges. There's the scientist faction that's only unlocked later on. There's the ecological faction, and there's the capitalist industrialist faction. And that's one of the themes for this one, which has... It accompanies pretty nicely and naturally the grayer tones that these factions' aesthetics accompany with it, bring with it. And have also these kind of percussions which really bring up the sounds of the machines you work in and creating and connecting, but with a more somber and contemplative tone to it.
Right.
So there's several worlds you could go, which is good because there's an entire OST that's at question there. Yeah, that's... I don't even dislike it, I just think it's not quite the right fit for the aesthetics of the game and only considers one aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. It seems like the composer may have been a little focused, or maybe even maybe it's not even a composer thing. Maybe it's a sound supervisor thing again. Maybe this is licensed from somewhere. But either way, it does sound like it's not quite where it should be. Like, it just doesn't give you the right vibe for the game.
Exactly. And that's a shame, because that's a very appealing vibe. I wondered for a while if it was something that was personal, that I was the one that saw the appeal in this, but judging by the conversations I've had with Rai when we were playing together this game in multiplayer, nope, that's an appeal that's very much shared and enjoyed by many. Or at least by us too.
Well, it's good to have validation amongst, your peers. It's always good.
Exactly.
And I think these discussions just goes to show that when you're putting together your soundscape, context really matters. And you need to really kind of pay attention to more than just the bare bones of what's going on here.
You have to handle the setting, you have to handle the gameplay, you have to handle the pace without playing favorites.
Yeah.
And it's complicated.
It is a very complicated process. This job, if this job were easy, I wouldn't make money doing it.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that in the end, there's always room for criticism, so long as it's constructive and so long as it's reasoned. These are 3 cases where I think the sound supervision and composition didn't hit the mark. We should make it okay to talk about that. There's no point in worshipping in an altar.
You don't have to be perfect every time, even if you're a composer.
No, you don't. But, on the other end, don't be afraid when the criticism of, hey, maybe this isn't quite right, comes calling. If someone just says, you suck, ignore that. If someone goes, hey, here's something you probably could have done differently, maybe just keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe just go, do they have a point? It's worth answering that question. And with that, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back next time with more of the music you love. Thank you guys. Have a good one.
And send us your mail at music.arcade.podcast at gmail.com if you have any constructive criticism for us.
Which we